Thank you guys for coming. As he said, I am a paleontologist, and if you ask most paleontologists how they got into this job, they would say that every kid goes through a dinosaur phase, we just never grew out of ours. But science has always been a part of my family, going back to when I was quite young. My father always took my brother and I out on weekend road trips, just camping trips, and just about everything we did always had something to do with nature. And so, we also did a lot of fossil hunting. And every time I found a fossil, no matter how small or fragmentary it was, it always just blew my mind. It absolutely mesmerized me at the thought that I was the only living thing to have ever seen a record of this organism that lived and crawled right where I found it 65, 100, or 300 million years ago. It just absolutely blew my mind. And that intense feeling of adventure and discovery continues to drive me even today. If I'm just walking around the desert, it's always driving me to look around the next bend, to climb over the next cliff, for days, for weeks, for months, always looking for that next great discovery. So I never really wavered in my desire to be a paleontologist, but I was a kid, I went through other phases. I wanted to be an astronomer, I wanted to be a baseball player, I wanted to be an animal behaviorist, and probably more than anything else, I wanted to be a cowboy. But as you guys probably know, there are a lot of jobs for cowboy adventure scientists, explorers, but they are all taken. And eventually I realized that, so I had to pick just one. And there was a moment that I remember very distinctly, that I will always remember, like it happened yesterday. And my dad and my brother and I were on our first road trip out west. We were driving our big red 8-passenger van. This was the late 80s. We were somewhere in the middle of the Plain States, so of course there was literally nothing to look at and absolutely nothing to do except argue with your brother over who would get to sit in the front seat and who would get to hold and use our family's new most prized possession, which was one of those giant 20-pound VHS video recorders that would sit on your shoulder. And so I just happened to win both those battles at this moment. And I remember distinctly seeing in the distance, on the horizon, this big, dark, foreboding thing, very slowly coming at us. And I eventually pointed out, I said, "Dad, looks like we have some storms coming in." And he said, "No, those are the Rocky Mountains." We were still 100 miles away, and you could see the Rocky Mountains. And it absolutely blew my mind. For the next 2 hours driving on the interstate, the mountains just kept getting bigger and bigger, till eventually they just took up all the view in front of me and reached from one horizon to the next. And I was completely memorized, and I remember having this incredibly visceral reaction, thinking, how is that possible? What in the world could have made that, and how long did it take? I don't know the answers to any of these questions, but I absolutely have to know. And it was kind of at that moment that I realized I had to be a geologist if I had any hope of ever getting to any of those answers. And finally, too, I had a way to work in my love of paleontology and fossils with this new science, at least new to me, called geology. So this was a really huge moment for me. So the next day, or possibly even that afternoon, we finally get to the mountains. We're in this tiny little dusty town called Medicine Bow, Wyoming. And we took a quick stop on the side of the road for a bathroom break, as father-son road trips often do. And we found a hill to climb, did that really quick, and on the side of that hill I found a nice big chunk of fossil. And I had no idea what it was, but it was impressive, certainly more impressive than anything I'd found before. It had a lot of shape to it. You could definitely tell it was something, and something big. And this was Wyoming. This is famous dinosaur hunting territory. So I was always very hopeful and very excited about what it might be. I didn't actually get it identified until about 9 years later, my first fall in college, when I took it to a professor. And I'll never forget this moment either. I brought it to Dr. King, and he ambled out of his office that looked like something out of an episode of Hoarders. And he looked down at it over his glasses and looked at me and told me it was a T-Rex toe. So kind of, the holy grail of dinosaurs for kids and for dinosaur nerds of all ages is the T-Rex, right? So my first dinosaur fossil was T-Rex. It was pretty exciting. So we jump ahead a few years. I got my degrees in geology. I've gotten to travel the world. I've helped excavate some of the largest dinosaurs, animals ever to walk the earth. I've studied ancient fish and turtles and crocodiles and real sea monsters. I'm basically getting to live my dream, and I'm doing what I've always wanted to do. Thank you. But it gets even better because after 10 years as a paleontologist at a local museum, I recently left that job to form my own organization called the Bighorn Basin Paleontological Institute. And with that job, we are a new nonprofit organization dedicated to paleontology, research, education, and outreach. And with that job, I not only get to be a paleontologist, but I get to take folks like you out to Montana and Wyoming, have you help us dig up and find the dinosaurs, all while we are sharing our knowledge and love of nature, both past and present. It's just about the greatest job I can ever imagine. Now, I was also supposed to talk about why I love science so much, and there are a lot of reasons for that, but I'm going to focus on two. The first is that science is a way of asking and answering questions about the natural world, and I've always been completely enthralled with nature and everything about it. And as a scientist, I am and we are intensely curious people, and it's never acceptable to us for someone to say, I don't know, or just because. It's never been acceptable to me. You can ask my kids, it's never acceptable to me now. And it was on a rare occasion when my father did not know the answer to a question about nature, it wasn't acceptable to him either. We would always go look up the answer and learn about it together. Which kind of brings me to the other main reason I love science so much. Because in my family, it's always been a way to bring people together. Some of my favorite memories are from when I was a kid with my dad, doing those things, learning about and sharing the love of nature, and just having that intense experience with him. That and playing baseball with him are the greatest memories I have of him. But it turns out that science goes back even farther in our family. As far back as we can trace several generations, there have always been scientists, every generation. It turns out I share a last name with astronomers in the Crimea who had sons who were immigrants to this family, one of which was a scientist. That man had a son who was my grandfather, who became a famous animal behaviorist, who had a son who became my father, who was a pharmacologist, who married my mother, who was an orthopedic biomechanist. And science is still, and nature are still bringing our family together today. I realized a few days ago when I was getting ready for this talk that my son over there, Jackson, he was 9 years old last year when he went on his first real trip out west and joined our dinosaur hunting expedition. And this summer, that's Lily. She will be almost 9 this summer when she joins me on her first real road trip out west and joins the expedition. And so, if in 30 years either of them or both of them are talking to a bunch of scientists and science lovers about how impactful those trips were to them as people, as nature lovers, or maybe even as scientists, I will be the luckiest. And this is where I didn't tell my wife I was talking to her. I will be the luckiest and most successful scientist there's ever been. So thank you.